Hey, it's Pete, North Las Vegas. We got some parts in today. Got our Geisley Posi snap, and here's what you get with it. Everything you need, including the wrench. This is the single stage, what Geisley calls the SSP M4 curve. M4 curve. Okay, so he gives you, if you haven't put a Geisley in before, for whatever reason, they're a little bit more difficult to get your disconnector, your trigger, and the pin and everything lined up when you install it in your receiver. So he gives you a slave pin to put in the trigger to help you keep that disconnector and the spring loaded up and make it a little easier to tap in there. I tried one time to put it in without the slave. You know, I'm not saying you can't do it, but it's really a lot easier if you use that. So first thing we're going to do is use a slave pin to knock out the regular trigger pin, and then we'll get that installed. Okay, so I put a little grease on the receiver pin bores. You know, put a little bit of grease on the inside. I did put a little grease on the slave pin before I pushed it in, and a little bit of grease on the actual trigger pin. So let's get that installed. I can't show everything on this platform, otherwise you know, your videos get pulled down by the powers that be. But I think you can see the direction we're going here for those of you that have never done this before. So let me drop the trigger in. Okay, so this is how it goes in, the spring orientation. And you can see the bottom of the spring here, the little bent tabs, the feet. That goes on the bottom of your receiver. And then, you know, this is going to be under a little bit of spring tension, so you're going to have to use one hand to kind of jockey the trigger around and get the hole lined up and then put the pin in. Okay, so like I said, I can't be showing you everything on this platform, otherwise these people get excited. But we'll get this in there. Okay, so you can see how I'm using the trigger pin to knock out that slave pin that we installed. So I'll get that tapped in all the way. Okay, so we're going to get the selector installed, then we're going to install the spring and detent, and then we'll get the grip on. Okay, so you can see how the lever has these little tabs, and those just line up with the slots. I'm going to use a little bit of orange Loctite on the screw. The instructions recommend purple. I don't have any purple. Okay, so we got the screw in there. Just snug it up. They don't recommend any torque value on the instructions. They just say to tighten it up, but obviously you're not going to put too much on that little screw. Okay, so once again, if you're new to doing this, the pointy end goes towards the selector. So you're going to put a little grease on it. Drop it down the hole with the pointy end towards the selector. I'm just going to use the spring to kind of seat it for now. Okay, it's time to get the grip on. Spring goes into this hole. When you put your grip on, be real careful, because it's really easy to get this spring out of alignment as you're putting the grip on, and you're going to mangle this thing up. So I put a little grease on the spring too and drop it in. Okay, so some may disagree, but this is how I do it. I put a little bit of lube on the threads on the receiver for the grip screw. You really don't need Loctite, and I would not put this in dry, but that's just me. I wouldn't put this in dry. All right, so let's get this grip on. I got the spring installed in the pocket, and we'll get the grip on there and do our best not to mangle that spring. Okay, so we're lined up. I'm just going to gently make sure we go into that hole without mangling up the spring. Okay, we're there. Now we just got to put the screw in. That could be a little tricky getting in there. Okay, so I'm using a socket screw for my grip. And what I'll do is I'll just stick a crescent wrench over the end of it, over the wrench to snug it up. Okay, so inside the hole there on this hammer, you can see what's called a J-hook spring. And that spring comes all the way down and captures the center groove of this pin. Let's see if we can get some better light. Anyway, when I get the pin back out, I'll show you that center groove that J-hook captures on the hammer. Okay, so there's the center groove of the pin that J-hook spring captures inside this hole. Let's see if we can see it. Okay, you can just kind of see it down there at the bottom. Now, for whatever reason, I got used to shoving my pins in from the left side towards the right. You can do it the other way. You can put these pins in any way you want, but what I do is I'll take the longest, the smoothest long section of the pin, and that's the direction that I'll drive the pin in. And that's just so that if I was to put the pin in this way, then as the pin was traveling through the trigger, it would have to hit that J pin, and then you have to keep going and capture it again. Whereas if I put the pin in with the long side, the non-groove side on the end, then it's only the center groove that catches that J-hook, so you get more pin engagement driving it in that way. Or I should say it's just easier to put it in that way for me. All right, so let's get this thing in. These spring legs go over the top of the trigger pin. And the same thing with a trigger pin, there's a groove on one of the sides, and because I put this pin in the same way, it's going to be this spring leg that catches the groove on this side. Not that any of that matters, but just trying to explain how all this works, especially if you're new to this. All right, I'm going to do this off camera because it takes two hands. Once I get this spring lined up and the hammer bent and the pin started, sometimes it takes a little bit of effort. All right, well, let's cock the hammer and see if the safety works. Pushing on the trigger, nothing happens. Come off of safety. Hammer goes. Let me cock this hammer off camera real quick and we'll double check, make sure reset works. Okay, so cocking the hammer with the trigger pulled and then releasing the trigger, it should go into reset. Okay, so everything's good. Okay, so we're using a BCM. Just going to dry fit this all together, and then I got to test something before I tighten the castle nut. But we'll talk about that when we get there. Okay, so because I did the 440 set screw modification to hold the spring and D10 in for the rear takedown, I don't have to worry about that spring when I screw all this together, so that makes it pretty nice. All right, screw this in a little bit more and push that retainer pin down and capture it. Okay, so that's as far as I can go without ramming into it. Forgot to mention the inside of this BCM buffer tube is very smooth. Very well done. Okay, so right now I just have this snug down. I don't have it torqued. And I'm not going to torque it until I get the upper on here with a BCG in it. And when I close the upper receiver onto this lower, I want to make sure that the tail end of the BCG, the bolt carrier group, makes good enough contact with this buffer to push it off of that retainer pin. Because once the receiver halves are closed, you don't want that buffer to hit that retainer pin. because that'll cause a problem during firing. So let's get the two halves mated together and make sure that when I close it, that BCG pushes the buffer off of that retainer pin. Okay, so I have a bolt carrier installed in my upper, and what we're watching for is, as we come down, does the bolt carrier start to push that buffer off the retaining pin down there at the bottom? And you can see, if you watch down there at that bottom retaining pin, we have plenty of clearance on this rifle, so we don't have a problem. Now, if we did have a problem, there is a fix, and I think I just got done hiding it for myself. Let me find it. I think it fell underneath the rifle. Okay, so if that BCG was not pushing the buffer off of that retainer pin when you close the two receiver halves, this is what's called an offset retainer pin. And because the top of the pin is on the edge here instead of sitting in the center, it allows that buffer to come out a little further and engage with the BCG. So if for some reason the dimension on your rifle is off, like maybe the BCG is a little bit short, there's something going on with the receiver relationship, or they just didn't get that retainer pin hole drilled in quite the right spot. So there is a fix for it. Okay, so we'll get our vise block installed in here. Put this in a vise. The spec on this is 38 to 42 foot-pounds. I'm not quite sure you need to go that tight with it, but we'll try to get it at least 38. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, it's torqued on. I've had some commenters in the past ask me if I stake my castle nuts, and I don't bother doing it. I've never had one come loose on me so long as they're torqued at the correct spec. I'm not an operator. I haven't been active duty since 1997. Like I said, I've never had one come loose so long as they're torqued correctly. I also have an older style Car 15 that uses the old style spanner ring. It's not a castle nut. And it just has a couple holes drilled in the ring where you put a spanner wrench on there. And there's no provisions to stake those on. They don't have little staking slots. So those, as far as I know, never got staked. If they did, I never saw one. And that rifle is 1995, and I put thousands of rounds through it, and that spanner ring has never come loose. So I don't see why a castle nut would, so long as it's torqued properly. But don't be like me. Stake your castle nut. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do this rifle tonight is put this side sling mount on here. Now you'll see it has an open end and a closed end. The closed end prevents over travel of the sling into the handguard area. So this closed area faces the rear of the rifle. The open end faces the front. So this is how it gets installed. And then this goes on the other side with those two pins. And those pins fit over the top of these spring-loaded legs. And I wish I could show you that on camera, but it would be difficult. I will say there's different ways to put those pins in, and I recommend that you do it with what's called some wrench pliers. Now these are a little different than your regular channel locks. These jaws move parallel, so as you close the jaws, they don't tighten in at an arc. And I'm also using some smooth jaws, so I don't mangle up the ends of the pins. These things can be kind of a booger to install unless you have a good technique. I wish I could show you on camera, but we'll get this thing on and at least show you the end result. Okay, so like I was saying earlier in the clip, I have one pin installed. So let me slide this on the barrel and we'll get this ready for the other pin. Okay, so this part here is where I get on a struggle bus, trying to find a sweet spot where I have the most room to get that pin in, get everything lined up and squeeze it in and put enough pressure down on these tabs to get the pin started. I'm going to do that off camera. Okay, so I'm starting to remember. I got the pre-installed pin on the top now, and it doesn't look like you have as much room to come in on the bottom to install the second pin, but it's easier to get my pliers in here. So pin on the top, come down here and put the remaining pin in on the bottom. Okay, I got it started, and I don't know if you can see on this side here, but it should come all the way through because putting pressure on one side kind of raised that spring tab on the other side. But you can kind of see where the pin starts off a little crooked and cockeyed. But man, what a pain in the butt. I don't know how the factory does it. They must have some kind of special tool or something. Maybe you guys know. All right, we got it in there. Pain in the butt. Just had to be patient and take my time. Double check, make sure we put it on right. All right, we're there. I'm just going to leave this on. I don't plan on running a M203 grenade launcher anytime soon. So I'll have two ways to put my sling on. All right, well, it's done. And this is probably the nuttiest build that I have ever put together. I mean, there's hardly a single part on this rifle that comes from the same manufacturer. Anyway, we'll pan through here real quick, and then we'll talk about all the different parts. Still got to get some of the excess grease off and clean it up. Okay, so this is a Prudent American Technologies, and it's a company that makes parts for Colt, so it does have a cage code. So we could say that it's Colt. The buffer assembly is BCM. The lower grip is Sons of Liberty Gunworks. The trigger assembly and selector is Geisley. The takedown pivot pin, mag catch, bolt catch, that's all Aero Precision. The upper is Aero Precision. That charging handle is Aero Precision. The carry handle is DS Arms. And DS Arms is kind of more known for doing FN valves, but I bought this about 4 or 5 years ago, and it is really nicely finished. It's a really nice carry handle. I don't know if they're still supplying them or who makes them for them, or if they're making them themselves, but yeah, this DS Arms carry handle, was pretty impressed when I got it. And Midwest Industries 2-piece drop-in. The barrel is Brownells SOCOM profile, but it's a 16-inch instead of the correct 14.5-inch. So everything on the barrel, front sight base, delta ring assembly, the entire complete barrel came from Brownells. The gas tube in there is CMMG. And let me flip the rifle around and we'll talk a little bit about the other side. So I had a couple of spare bolt carriers, and one of them happened to be a Wilson Combat with the logo on it. And I kind of, at first, I didn't want to use a logoed bolt carrier group. But seeing how this thing is like the ultimate Frankenstein carbine, I just decided that having a WC logo on there is perfectly fine and saves me a few bucks from going out and buying another BCG. So the other side of the Geisley ambidextrous looks almost mil-spec. And this side here, I was talking about this before in an earlier video. The actual Colt or the Schmid ambidextrous, this socket screw would be sticking all the way out, and this lever would be more flush behind the socket screw. So Geisley kind of puts it into a pocket so that it doesn't stick out, but I don't know. I'm okay with that. Well, we got one thing left to do, and that's take it out and see if it shoots around corners. So maybe we'll get a video up of testing this thing here pretty soon. All right, some of it was a pain in the butt along the way, but it all worked out. Pete, North Las Vegas. Over and out.